So, let's talk about something fascinating and pretty terrifying. How does a prison become, well, a university for crime? We're diving into the story of Brazil's Comando Vermelho, the Red Command. And we're asking a huge question. Was its creation a complete accident or a deliberate strategy that unleashed a force that would change a nation forever?
Just listen to this. This is from the gang's founder, a guy they called the Professor. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Right from the get-go, this wasn't just about crime or controlling territory. This was a vision, a revolutionary one, to build a massive army from society's forgotten people and to do what the political revolutionaries couldn't.
Okay, so that's the big question, right? How on earth does a bunch of regular criminals suddenly morph into this super disciplined, almost ideologically driven force? I mean, how do they learn to fight like a guerrilla army? Well, the answer, according to the source material we're looking at, takes us to a very specific and very explosive time and place.
In that place, it was the Ilha Grande prison, a max security facility that turned into this completely improbable meeting point that would literally alter the course of history.
Okay, so here's the one thing everyone agrees on. It's a straight-up fact. Back during Brazil's military dictatorship, the government had this interesting idea. They decided to lock up their political enemies, we're talking leftist guerrillas, thinkers, activists, in the exact same prison as some of the nation's most hardened criminals. And it's this forced living situation, this pressure cooker, that becomes the birthplace of the Comando Vermelho.
And you gotta understand, this wasn't like a weekend get-together. We're talking about almost a full decade where these two polar opposite groups are living side by side. Same cells, same food, same everything. And somewhere in that 10-year span, something fundamentally changes because the organization that walked out of that prison after 1979, it was a whole different beast, nothing like Brazil had ever seen before.
So what in the world happened during those 10 years? Well, according to the source we're digging into, it wasn't just time served. It was an education, like a full-blown curriculum, taught right there in the prison yard, on the art of guerrilla warfare.
And just look at how specific this stuff is. This isn't just how to be a better thief. No, this is professional, almost military-level strategy. You've got simultaneous bank robberies designed to completely confuse the cops. You have secret medic stations for your wounded. They even had critics, people whose whole job was to watch an operation and figure out how to do it better next time. That's a military debrief. And then there's the propaganda, framing what they do as a liberation struggle. I mean, this is straight out of the urban guerrilla playbook, and now it's in the hands of common criminals.
And it wasn't just verbal lessons either. They had required reading. And look at this list. These aren't books you just pick up at your local bookstore. We're talking about rare, banned texts. These are the literal instruction manuals for professional revolutionaries, written by guys like Che Guevara and Carlos Margalla. Think about it, just the act of smuggling these into a maximum security prison and then passing them around to other inmates, that's a huge deal. That's a very intentional act.
And this is where we get to the heart of the whole debate. You have a bunch of disorganized crooks who go into prison. They spend a decade living with professional revolutionaries. And they come out as a super organized, ideologically motivated force using classic guerrilla tactics. So, was this all just a massive coincidence? An accident?
Basically, there are two competing theories here. On one side, you have the unintentional outcome theory, put forward by a journalist named Carlos Almarin. His idea is that this knowledge just kind of leaked out, through casual chats in the yard, over meals, a complete accident. But on the other side, you have the argument from our source author who says no way. They argue this was a deliberate, systematic plan, a strategic choice to teach these criminals and essentially weaponize crime.
And here's the quote from Almarin himself, who, by the way, spent over a decade researching this. He says flat out, the revolutionaries never intended to teach criminals how to wage guerrilla warfare. He just couldn't find any hard proof, any smoking gun that this was a deliberate plan. For him, it was just a spontaneous, unpredictable result of locking these two groups up together, a pure accident of history.
Yeah, but the author of the text we're looking at, they find that explanation, let's just say, completely unconvincing. In fact, they lay out a really compelling case for why this couldn't possibly have been an accident.
The author's main point really just boils down to common sense. Think about it. An accident is something that happens in a moment, right? A slip-up. But when you have a consistent transfer of super complex technical and ideological knowledge over 9 years, that's not an accident anymore. That's a process. And a process, they argue, implies someone intended for it to happen.
And they back this up with 3 pretty solid lines of reasoning. First up, the discipline of the revolutionaries.
These guys were trained to withstand torture to protect their secrets, so the idea that they just carelessly spill their entire playbook in casual conversation, the author says that's just absurd. Second, the logic of the collective. These political prisoners didn't just do their own thing, they operated in disciplined committees. Something as big as teaching a whole wing of criminals would have had to be a group decision, not just a few guys going rogue. And finally, the most concrete piece of evidence, the books. You just don't accidentally give someone a banned guerrilla warfare manual. That is a physical act of teaching, plain and simple.
So you might be asking, what about the people who were there and deny it happened? Well, the author tackles this head-on. They basically say that testimony is just an opinion, not a hard fact. They point to one former political prisoner who said it was improbable that these individualistic criminals could even learn a collective ideology. And the author's comeback is just perfect. They say, look at the results. The improbable happened. A bunch of disorganized criminals did become master organizers. And for the author, that's the ultimate proof that they had some very, very good and very intentional teachers.
Okay, so let's just say we follow the author's logic for a minute. Let's say this was a deliberate strategic act. That leads us to one last and honestly pretty chilling question. Why? Why would you do this? What could possibly be the motive for creating this monster?
Now, the source author throws out a few possible motives, and it's really important to stress this is their interpretation. One idea is co-optation. Maybe they wanted to recruit these criminals into the armed struggle. Or maybe it was something much simpler and a lot darker. Revenge. A way to plant a seed of pure chaos that would torture the military government for decades to come. The author even goes so far as to suggest that this chaos is still politically useful today, creating problems that can then be blamed on the system.
So, in the end, we're left with this massive question. The source we've examined makes a really powerful case that this prison alliance wasn't an accident. It was the intentional creation of a political weapon, one that went on to reshape an entire nation. But it's still a theory. It's one interpretation of a really murky history. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? When the real story is written in the shadows, who actually gets to write the final chapter?